The current pandemic has launched everyone into a challenging journey of change. Isn't that right? I mean, things have changed. Being socially distanced, thinking about how kids will enter school, how will we restart the economy, standing in lines to get into a store, everything has changed. With that, we have also had to change our expectation about how God provides resources for us in the essentials of life. My heart breaks for thousands, literally thousands of businesses have gone under during this time. And if you're one of those, I want to encourage you that God has not forgotten about you. There is a next, there is a tomorrow, and God will provide for you. I want to also say for those of you that are parents facing uncertain days, God is going to take care of your children. Thousands of churches worldwide have been praying for God to move mightily in the face of uncertainty. And He is going to surprise us. Just like Kanye West is now running for president. How many of you would have predicted that rock in the pond? Well, God's got some stuff up His sleeve. And I want to say this, the darker it gets, the closer He is. The darker it gets, the closer He is. And how God provided for the Israelites in their exodus from Egypt and bondage and slavery and moving through the wilderness to the threshold of the promised land gives us how we journey through uncertainty. The Bible gives us all the answers for every situation that we face in life. We just have to plumb the lines of it. So if we journey well, there's a future of promise ahead of us. Now, we open the story. We look at Exodus chapter 16, beginning in verse 2. The whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, and the people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." And the Lord said to Moses, he's praying, "Behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily." So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, Moses and Aaron being the leaders, he said, "At evening, the end of the day, you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because He has heard your grumbling against the Lord." How many of you have grumbled? I have grumbled and complained during this pandemic. Can I just unload confession? And sometimes my good wife has had to tell me, "Stop it. Enough already." You know, what if your congregation could hear you now? Okay, so I have been the grumbler and the complainer. And if we're all human, listen, God understands that, because you're going to find that God heard their grumbling, understood their humanity, and still answered. Not that He wants us to stay in the grumbling mode. He wants us to journey onward. So what do we learn from how the Israelites journeyed out of slavery, 430 historic years of that, into what was next? First of all, we must release the natural drift to crave the past. This is so important. We must release the natural drift to crave the past. So strong was the pull to yesterday for the Israelites that they would have rather died with their bellies full rather than move into the promised land. Think about that. Their current sense of stress and their longing for yesterday, in spite of having seen miracles, signs, and wonders, the 10 plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, the pillar of fire, the cloud of glory. When things got hard, it was only an 11-day journey, everyone, from the edge of Egypt into the promised land. But during that test, going through the wilderness, the grumbling and complaining came up because they were so tied to the past, they couldn't see tomorrow, even though the Lord had repeatedly said, "I'm bringing you in to a land flowing with milk and honey." This will not last forever. Every pandemic globally has ended. And when you're in it, you're thinking, when will this ever end? History tells us all pandemics end. It's just how it ends and when it ends. And do you know who can determine when that happens? It's you and I. It's not what happens in the White House. It's what happens in God's house. And the Church of Jesus Christ, through her prayers, through her servanthood, through her love for a people in the community and the city, can make the difference that changes the narrative completely. The sense of present loss so overwhelmed the Israelites that emotion trumped reason, which leads us to the second thing we learn from their journey. Guard the health of your soul. We must guard the health of our soul, because constant complaining and grumbling brings a negativity that increases the sense of adversity. It undermines faith. I understand what that's like. I know I can feel like when I'm going dark. This has been hard. It hasn't been easy. No matter what you see on TikTok videos, okay? No matter what you see on commercials on television where everybody puts forth their best face, I will tell you that if you peel away the cloak of performance, because nobody hangs their dirty language out to dry, or their dirty laundry out to dry for people can see it. There is a reality where emotion has dwarfed reason, so we need to guard the health of our soul. We go back to the text, opening text. The whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. That would be like all of you and your kids, everybody grumbling against Paris. Who would be Aaron? I would be Moses, right? All of your kids always constantly grumbling at you, though you're doing your best. The people of Israel said to them, "Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord." The current stress brought a bad confession. They're talking suicide. They're talking death when God was trying to bring them into life. Unprecedented change produced an unprecedented stress, which produced an unhealthy confession. The self-talk, the negativity, and the whole congregation. The text says the whole congregation was like this. So there was, aside from Moses and Aaron, there was nobody that they could process the journey of uncertainty with who had a healthy demeanor. What does that tell us? We all need others who have a health and a balance in their soul, so we can process the issues that we go through when we are experiencing adversity and uncertainty. They had no one. All 3 million of them, including their children, with the exception of Moses and Aaron and perhaps their families, had a healthy thing. So we know what happened. Therefore, there was a kind of a mass crowd hysteria going on, and it was a mutiny and a rebellion. Moses and Aaron, they had forgotten about the Red Sea parting. Their immediate need for sustenance and provision and resource was lost, so they immediately said, "We prefer yesterday. In fact, it would have been better if we died." And so during this pandemic, some people have died. In our own congregation, people have taken their lives. In every congregation, that has happened. You don't hear about it. Because beyond TikTok videos and social media displays are the reality of people that have to trudge through the difficulties of life. This is where I live. This is where all of us as Christians, as believers, can make an incredible difference, because in times of upheaval, people are looking for health. I had a friend, I've told you this story before. He had retired from his job, but an addiction to the stress of his previous job caused him to lose his family. And then we had a lunch. And in the lunch, he described to me how he had in detail planned his own death. That lunch saved his life and would create a future for him that he now lives. He's now back in the workforce and he's making 6-figure income. But he had planned his suicide to the T, because when you go through loss of what was, you lose hope for the future and the possibility of what is. Recently, I talked to another friend, and he had gone into a deep depression. And during the depression, he said that I had decided, it gotten so dark, I started to see the spiraling. He's an educator today. That If my family was not with me, I would have taken my life in my automobile. And he said at that point, there was enough of a pause to know I needed help. Reached out to a mental health professional who truly helped him, gave him some medication to get through the stress, and provided conversation. But the darkness increased when the mental health professional who really helped him killed himself. So we're having a lunch recently. And I looked at him and I said, it took an immense amount of courage to share that because you look perfectly put together to me. I said, why don't you come to group? So he's in group now. Conversations like this during a wilderness season need to be multiplied throughout our city. Wearing a mask doesn't mean we silence our voice. In fact, we can wear a mask, but unmask our voice to give hope to others who are going through what the Israelites have gone through. They'll smile. They may put on a show outwardly, but inwardly there's a storm. How many of us know people like that? Listen, they're everywhere right now. Parents are concerned about children going back to school. Tony's taught school. I've taught school. I've overseen a school. I've been a counselor and a coach. Pastor Paris has been an educator. We weren't always ministers. So we can identify, we can understand the stress. How do we re-enter the tourist industry in its full bloom? Because Hawaii's economy depends on that leg opening up. How do we do this? The stress, the delay, another month, businesses going under, the PPP program running out. And we can, if we're not careful, we can just get caught up in the moment and look down when God is saying, I want you to look up. I am in control of who is in control. I am in control of what is in control. And right now, we just kind of need to be those Israelites that look up and say, that's right. The God who parted the Red Sea, who led us by a pillar of fire, a cloudy pillar, and displays of fire, is going to lead us not just through this, but to what's next. Somebody say amen. And what's next is always better than what was last. Change is hard, especially in Hawaii, but change is hard for virtually everybody. Trust is going to be the key. And when we trust, we draw a line of faith and we take a next step to obey. God often shows us just take what the next step is. And then when we take the next step, there's usually the manifestation of blessing. This past Tuesday, I had the honor of doing the memorial in the Senate chamber for senators, the senators, and some of the top leaders in the state of Hawaii, and memorial for the late Senator Breen Harimoto. And I think you'll see the program there, funeral program, or the celebration of life program back on the screen. And I was recounting how when I met Breen, I had the pleasure of leading him to the Lord, building a friendship first, leading him to the Lord, and then deep, long conversations and prayers and leading him into heaven in his final moments. Never had the opportunity to do both ends, lead someone to Jesus and then lead someone into heaven. It was difficult. It was emotional. But I was recounting to the Senate chamber that I remember when he first told me, I'm going to leave my corporate job, which had him a made man, very well. He was doing very well, and I stayed there. I mean, he would have been like in a really good place. And he says, I'm going to run for a seat in the Board of Education against an incumbent who hasn't lost in 5 terms. What do you think? I told him, I didn't tell him what I thought because I thought he was crazy. Because in my mind, I went, how are you going to get provided for? How are you going to make a living? You got 3 kids, you know what I mean? What are you doing? Because you don't get paid when you're a member of the Board of Education. Okay? And he said, just trust God. It's like an Israelite in the wilderness. And then, of course, Governor Cayetano appointed him to be chairman of the Board of Education, which means He's the boss of the Board of Education. Can you imagine the conversations happening on the Board of Education right now? Oh, I'm sure you've read about it. There's stress, there's disagreement, there's tension, and more stress and more tension. Teachers are concerned about going back to work for the safety of their health. Parents are concerned about their children. The unions are involved. And Breen said there were moments he would call me and we would get together. And he says, you know what hurts the most is in stress, you lose your emotional control and it becomes personal attacks. And he says, Pastor Norman, this is so hard. Because if you know Breen Harimoto, he's a Japanese Jesus. I have never met and known someone who was so wonderful, so kind. I mean, I never saw him. I've seen him have conviction and firmness, but I've never seen him lose contain and be angry. And I realized in my discipleship journey with Breen that God put me together with him, not so that he could learn from me, but that I could learn to be like him. In fact, I've had people tell me you should be more like him as a pastor. Because his personality was just so kind. He's the only person I know of, and in talking to legislators, that if you disagreed with him, you felt bad. It's just really unusual. And so he said, there was one board meeting. He said, I knew we needed to change, okay? We needed to experience the resources that we needed, but we needed to prepare to receive it in a different way. That's our point, right? Prepare to experience provision in a different way. So he said, it got so contentious, we were talking, and he said, I just didn't know what to do. It was bad. So he said, I just bowed my head, closed my eyes, and I began to pray. And he said, and an interesting thing happened. One of the guys got mad at me, and he said, Breen, you're sleeping on us. Brother, you chair Board of Education, you're sleeping, you're falling asleep on us. He didn't say it like that. I'm giving it my Kalihi spin, right? And then, they looked at him like they were angry, but he looked up and he went, no, I was actually praying for us. And I said, what happened? I mean, who says that, right? I mean, who bows their head and closes their eyes in the middle of a board meeting fight? Breen. So I said, what did they say? He said, they didn't say a thing. In fact, everybody got quiet. And he said, the meeting changed. I said, and? And he said, I thought they would think I was lying or something. But you know why they didn't think that? Because they knew. You don't make stuff like that up. And God just visited, and he said, guess what? Because we had other meetings. He said, the tenor changed. People started getting along. God entered the room. Breen brought him into the room, and then he bust out the secret weapon. He took the next step. There's this book called The Purpose-Driven Life you all need to read. I was kidding. No kidding. And he served as a 2-term chairman, 8 years on the Board of Education. God knew what he was doing when he had Governor Cayetano appoint Breen Harimoto as chair of the Board of Education. How many of you know that he would be fantastically needed right now? Right? Now, the thing about Breen, he never judged anybody. He always saw into the heart of a person. The solutions were in people, but you could never judge people. You had to look for the gold. Because he understood the sovereignty of God, that people who are around any table are there because God put them there. But you're not going to get the best out of them if it becomes personal. You judge people. So I'm going to give you a moment here. Now, you need to listen to this, especially at the end, because in the first service, it took about 3 seconds for them to get it. Okay. Now, a man smelling of booze and cigarettes sat down on a subway next to a priest. Get that? You got that picture now. His tie was stained, there was red lipstick on his collar and face, and a half-empty bottle of gin was sticking out of his torn coat pocket. He opened his newspaper and began reading. After a few minutes, the man turned to the priest and asked, "Tell me, Father, do you happen to know what causes arthritis?" The priest replies, my son, it's caused by loose living, consorting with cheap, wicked women, too much alcohol, contempt for your fellow man, sleeping around with prostitutes, and a lack of a bath." You listening? The drunk muttered in response, "Well, I'll be," and then returned to his paper. The priest now, thinking that he had prejudged, thinking that he was too direct, too strong, nudged the man and apologized. He said, "I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to come on so strong. How long have you had arthritis?" The man answered, "I don't have it, Father. I was just reading here that the Pope suffers from it." You know how hard it was to get through this story? Okay? And that's Breen. That thought would have never entered his mind. So he went from Board of Education to the City Council. And by the way, from the City Council to the Senate. At each point we talked. We prayed together. He's the only one we know of in the history of Hawaii politics. Every time he ran for an office, everybody dropped out. You can't make it up. He ran unopposed. In fact, I was at a dinner where I heard Governor Ige talk about it. He said never in his history has he seen everybody leave a race when a person enters it. God cleared the way. He made a way. He was a way maker. And Senator Harimono took every moment and opportunity to take a stand for what was right. You remember now, he was the first leader of the rail project from the city when it was actually run well. You talk about controversy. If I ask some of you, how many of you are here like the rail? Maybe some of you would raise your hand, many of you, and there's some of you, you're angry at the rail. Breen Harimoto was the person God put at the head of it as part of the city council in the very beginning. In the Senate, the legendary stand was against the physician-assisted death bill. While he had cancer, while he was in pain, while he was suffering, he voted no twice. While he was I know this because I'm his pastor and his friend. And nobody could say anything. It was like at the Board of Education table when he actually just said, "I was praying." That legacy will stand forever. The sanctity and the preciousness of a life that only God can take. I was with him in the very last moments as he prayed and he was in pain. I was in his room, tears coming down his eyes. It was hard. He didn't change. Courage, dignity. And he told me, "Pastor Norman, if the Lord doesn't heal me, I'm at peace. I'm ready to go home." But at the same time, he said, "I'm going to retire from the state, but I'm not going to be retiring as a senator." I thought, you can do that? I said, how does that work? But to the very end, he held out faith for the best while we prepared for the worst. But to him, worst was not necessarily the end. But we come to the end today by looking at this as we come through the Israelite journey. Know that when we feel close to breaking down, God is close to breaking through. The worse it seems to get, the closer we are to what's next. The darker it gets, the closer it is. God moves entirely the opposite of the way we logically process life. History shows us that God lets things go to a certain point such that when the breakthrough happens, we know it's Him. The fact that you're here today tells me you have faith. The fact that you're here today tells me that you're not buying everything the world declares as truth. This is truth. And we must see everything through the lens of God's Word, who is making a way where there seems to be no way. I have come to the place at my age that when it appears to be getting worse, God is increasing His power. It's just that we cannot see it yet. So, when things seem to be spiking, God is increasing His working. Now, let's go back to our final text here. We go back to our opening passage. Scripture needs to speak this, but we take it a few verses on. Watch this. As soon as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the people of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. And the Lord said to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the people of Israel. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall all be filled with bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine flake-like thing, fine as frost in the ground. And when the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? This is not like the sledge and the stew they had as slaves in Egypt. For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is cinnamons. No, it is the bread that the Lord has given to you to eat. Malasadas or whatever. You know, as a kid, I would read this, I'm thinking, this feels like sweet meat. You know what I'm saying? Maybe from the South, Tony. I don't know. But they ate it and they loved it. Because God always gives you something next that's better. But remember this. The generation that grumbled did not enter the promised land. All of them died except Moses. No, all of them died except Joshua and Caleb. While we go through this pandemic and everything attached to it, and the stress of the economy and health, and the racial divide, all of these things, we need to let God work in our soul so we can turn grumbling into godliness, fear into faith. Because faith, the end of the day, is the only thing that will get us from here to next. And as we move forward and we end today in worship, we must understand God is at work. He is at work, though we can't see Him. I remember when we started this church, I had the opportunity to take over the mother church. I was an employee of the church when we started this church because the Lord said, that's not my will for you. I realized I went to becoming a planter of a church, which means it's like you're the head of a business. You have to deal with funds, raising funds or funds, and facilities. It was a whole different swing. I had prepared myself to re-enter to teach school. I realized revenue streams had to come some other ways. But it was like Breen, right? How are you going to live? How are you going to live with the economy the way it is? But see, if we follow where God guides, God will provide. The thing is, if we settle for what was and the comfort of that, and God's here, but we want to stay here, the promised land will never happen. God's doing an amazing thing right now. He's trying to take His bride, His church, worldwide into the promised land where we're going to see a massive outbreak of the Spirit of God sweeping the country and the world. It's coming. Every prophetic voice in the world says it's coming. What is now and how we respond now will determine the place we hold in the glory of what's coming next. Thank you for being a people of faith. Thank you very much. And again, as I recount my last conversations with Senator Harimoto, on the one hand, he said, I ain't retiring as a senator. So he kept believing for the miracle to the very end. And at the same time, we had talks about what's next. We talked about heaven, Don Piper, 90 Minutes in Heaven, Kenneth Downey, all the stories in our church where people came back from the dead, saw heaven, got a glimpse, and we talked about that. And then we had to switch in our conversation and talked about, there's things I want to do as a senator in the state of Hawaii. It was an emotional, unusual conversation. And then in the middle, we would pray. See, Breen, God's got a way. Whatever way He's got, your next is the best. His last words to me were, Pastor Norman, I'm at peace. I'm ready. I'm ready for whatever is next. Because I couldn't predict it. And I want to believe when He stepped through heaven, He went, this is everything I heard about, but better. No chemo, no radiation, no suffering. And by the way, I told the Senate chamber, I said, Breen could never stay still, right? And if heaven was floating on a cloud, playing a harp, eating figs, He probably would have said, send me someplace else. That's too boring. What God has next for you, for us, is not boring. It's better.